Good morning, brethren. Thank you so much for having me here and for the opportunity to address the Missouri Lodge of Research. It is truly an honor to speak to this gathering because so many publications created by the Missouri Lodge of Research are in my own library, and I have used them in my researches. This Lodge of Research has an impressive heritage and background, and I am so gratified and happy to see this, not only this kind of turnout, but to find out that a Lodge of Research in any state has 900 members is much to be proud of. I wish we had the same in Indiana. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you so much for coming out this morning. As the worshipful master said, I co-wrote 2 books with my wife in the last couple of years. People have asked about working with my wife and how that worked out, and well, we're still speaking to each other after 2 books. She did buy me a present after we finished the last one. It was my headstone, and didn't have to put both dates on it, but at any rate, she's the love of my life and my best friend after 30 years. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. We just celebrated our anniversary. She wanted me to take her somewhere expensive, so I took her to a gas station. So, at any rate, I wrote Freemasons for Dummies for the Masonically Clueless. I wrote it for our wives and for our families. And I wrote it because when I became a Mason, that kind of book really didn't exist. And I went looking for a basic introductory book on the fraternity that I was smart enough to understand, and because I was a pretty dumb guy, it didn't exist, so I had the opportunity to write the book that I went looking for after I joined. I will say that it has been one of the most gratifying experiences in my life, because not a week goes by that I don't hear from someone who said that it influenced them to join the fraternity. That is an awesome responsibility to be handed, for somebody to say, this dumb book that you wrote really convinced me to join the fraternity. Thanks to you, and I mean that, thanks to you, this dumb book has sold over 75,000 copies worldwide. It's been translated into French and German and Dutch, and Masons all over the world are joining, partially because they're finding it in this book. I can't tell you what a debt of gratitude I owe this fraternity for the opportunity to do that. But I will tell you, I got to write this book because of Dan Brown. Dan Brown told the world about 6 years ago that his sequel to the Da Vinci Code was going to be about the Freemasons, and it was going to take place in Washington, D.C., and then he didn't write it. He sat on it for 6 years, which gave me and a whole lot of other Masons and non-Masons alike the opportunity to rush out into print and get more mainstream books published on this fraternity than through mainstream publishers, not just Masonic publishers, than at any other time in our history. I'll tell you briefly about my Masonic career, just to tell you where some of the ideas that I'll talk about today came from. I joined Broad Ripple Lodge number 643 in Indianapolis. Sort of a funny name. It's named after a bend in a river. The river goes along and then it has this big loop in it, a broad ripple, hence the name. In November of 1998, our lodge was like many other lodges. We were struggling at that time, so they did my entered apprentice degree, and 5 months later, they still couldn't get enough guys together to do my fellow crafter master mason, so they sent me to a one-day class on the Ides of March in 1999. I was immediately jabbed with an officer's pike into the senior steward's chair. In December of that year, I became senior warden, and a year later, I became master of the lodge, 2 years after joining the fraternity. I don't recommend it. But I will tell you, when I would tell that story 7 or 8 years ago, I would see a lot of shaking heads and oh no, oh, and heart clutching. Today, when I tell that story, I see a lot of heads bobbing. It's not such an unusual circumstance anymore. I still don't recommend it. But at the first meeting that I presided over as master of the lodge, the vote was whether to close, merge, move, sell the building, shut it down. I said, fellas, I just got here. Give me a break. We had 200 members, barely 7 came, and after spending months personally calling all of our members, I concluded that we would probably never see most of them for whatever reason. So we tried everything. We tried everything over the space of the next 4 or 5 years, and when that didn't work, we tried something else. And I have to tell you, today our average stated meetings have 25 to 30 guys. The last Master Mason degree I was at about a month and a half ago, we have lots of after-meeting meetings that take place at local watering holes. And I walked in and there were 50 people connected with our lodge at that, which for a lodge that was getting ready to vote to close itself 7 or 8 years ago, I find that astonishing. Our story isn't unique. It's happening all over the country. Not all lodges are destined to live forever, but lodges are rising from the ashes all over the U.S. and Canada because a few core dedicated Masons are taking dying lodges and making them into the sort of lodges that they always were looking for when they joined, or they'll open new ones. Outside of the U.S., many countries have a major problem with anti-Masonry. England, France, Spain, most Islamic countries have laws restricting Freemasonry, or at least strong anti-Masonic movements and a big distrust of the fraternity. Up until 6 days ago, most Americans weren't anti-Masonic. Most Americans simply had zero opinion about this fraternity. Most Americans didn't know who and what the Freemasons were. And our job wasn't just attracting new men to the fraternity, it was also much harder than previous generations because we also had to teach society about who we were. Well, that was 6 days ago. If you haven't read it yet, Dan Brown has written a 500-page love letter to this fraternity. I've taken made a few notes that I need to look at. Brethren, the lost symbol sold 1 million copies in one day. And the Freemasons are front and center in this story. They are the good guys from top to, I'm not going to ruin the end for you, but they are the good guys from top to bottom in this book. Now, out of that 1 million copies sold in the first day, that's likely 950,000 people who really didn't know who or what the Freemasons were, who were reached on the very first day of sales of that book. Its initial English language version print run is 6.5 million copies. 5 million in the U.S. alone. And they expect to sell out of that very quickly. Brethren, you've heard of a sonic boom. I think we're poised for a Masonic boom, and it's coming right at us. As I said last night, like an angry lodge goat aimed right at our heads. Dan Brown has single-handedly created new interest in this fraternity overnight. As I said, there are now more than 60 mainstream books published in the last 6 years about this fraternity, in addition to support this book before it even came out, and more are on the way. I'm going to throw some real boring numbers at you, but you need to bear them in mind. The Da Vinci Code sold 81 million copies worldwide. So let's say people hate this book. Let's say it only does half the business the Da Vinci Code did. Okay, that's 40 million copies. 40 million sets of eyeballs reading about us, plus throw in another 10 million cheapskates that steal their roommate's copy or, take it out of the library or something. Okay, so 50 million sets of eyeballs reading about Freemasonry. Brethren, this is unbelievable. Now, some people will say, who cares? It's only a novel. Well, here's why the potential influence of this book needs to interest us. In May of 2006, a Catholic group that called itself the Da Vinci Code Response Group sponsored a survey of 1,000 adults in the United Kingdom. The results of that poll said that people who read the Da Vinci Code were twice as likely to believe that Jesus Christ fathered children, and 4 times as likely to think of the Catholic organization Opus Dei as a murderous sect. The novel at that time had been read by 22% of the adult British population. The Priory of Zion was a 20th century hoax by a French monarchist, yet Dan Brown claimed that it was a fact. That it was a fact at the beginning of his book. 1 out of 3 people who read the book thought that the Priory of Zion was a very real medieval organization, a figure that falls to just 6% among people who hadn't read the book. A massive 60% of the adults polled believed there was truth to the claim that Jesus had married Mary Magdalene and had a child after reading that book, compared with just 30% of those who hadn't read it. And asked if they thought whether the Catholic organization Opus Dei had ever ordered or carried out a murder in its history, 17% of the readers believed that it had. Now that is the power of a dumb novel. And he's written about us from top to bottom in this book, brethren. A new influx of Masons are blowing the dust off this fraternity, and while there have been clashes between traditionalists who want things to remain as they were after World War II versus an exuberant group of young men who want to make instant changes, this fraternity seems to be finding a new middle ground. People have been lecturing this fraternity for 30 or 40 years saying, we must adopt change, we must embrace change. Brethren, this fraternity has changed tremendously just in the 11 years that I've been a Mason. Huge changes have been made, and changes are happening within it all the time. I said last night, history is something that happens when you're not paying attention, and we are living through an historic moment in this fraternity. There are lodges that concentrate on pitch-in dinners and a hot hand of poker, but there are also a growing number of lodges that are concentrating on the more esoteric aspect of Freemasonry's 3 centuries of ritual ceremonies, philosophy, and symbolism. While once there were lodges of hundreds and even thousands of members, there are new lodges that are forming with just small handfuls of men in search of a smaller, more intimate, and active experience. You've probably heard of European concept lodges and some other different concepts that are being played with around the country in terms of slightly altering the lodge experience. I don't know how many of you are members of the Allied Masonic degrees, but the AMD is the fastest growing appendant body in Freemasonry in this country right now. Well, why are AMD councils growing so quickly? Well, they have small, limited membership. They generally restrict to no more than 30 or 40 members at most. They meet less frequently. They meet over a great dinner. They concentrate on education. They always have a guest speaker. These are other types of Masonic lodges that are being formed. We call them something else. We call them AMD councils, but men within the fraternity are looking for a more intimate type of lodge experience because, I can't get to know 200 members, but I can get to know 25 or 30, and when Charlie doesn't show up for a meeting, I'll be more likely to call and find out why not. There's great experimentation going on in this fraternity all across the country. We have indeed embraced change. There's a thirst for education in Freemasonry. That's why it's so gratifying to find a gathering of this size. Education is the key to our future. The space race in the 1960s, we sent men to the moon in the 1960s, and yet today we don't have the technology to build a Saturn V rocket. It's no different from the cathedral building boom in the 1200s that resulted in taller, bigger, more impressive Gothic churches over a 150-year period, and then a lull came because the builders began to forget their secrets. Roofs caved in, people panicked, they decided that the giant cathedrals were too expensive, and by the 1400s the operative Freemasons were never again the most powerful and respected trade organization in Europe. There's a lesson in that. By straying too far from the secrets that make this fraternity what it is. This is why education and keeping the spark alive within us as Masons and as a fraternity is the cornerstone to our future. We can all help each other if we don't keep reinventing the wheel. We started a group last year, the Masonic Society, to help organizations like your research lodge. The Masonic Society has gone from 0 to almost 1,000 members in a little over a year. We have ongoing research projects. Our quarterly magazine has set a new standard in American Masonic publications. Our most recent undertaking has been a website in conjunction with the Masonic Service Association and the George Washington Masonic Memorial to answer questions about the fraternity that are posed in the lost symbol. Most important for the Missouri Lodge of Research is that the Masonic Society believes there is great unsung work going on in the research lodges across the U.S. and Canada. Great papers get written, and then they're read over a lunch, and then they disappear forever. The Masonic Society wants to share those papers with the Masonic world at large, and the Journal wants to publish your work because we believe the next wave of important Masonic scholars is sitting in this room. Men come to Masonry today after studying it for a long time. In many cases, they know more than our own members do. They're looking for something mythical, something legendary, with the promise of the knowledge that takes work to achieve. They don't want it easier, or they don't want it cheaper, and they don't want it faster. Indiana did a survey 2 years ago among men who came into the fraternity in the previous year. And they asked about the lodge experience and what their expectations had been. The numbers that came out of it were that men in their 20s and 30s expected Freemasonry to take time, to truly be an achievement to get to be a Master Mason, and that they expected it to be more expensive than it turned out to be. It was our guys, it was the guys in their 50s who wanted it fast and wanted it less expensive. But I find this interesting. We talk about what young men want in this fraternity. Many times we talk about that without even asking them. We just make assumptions about what they want. And the truth of the matter is they want Freemasonry to not be ordinary. They want it to be extraordinary. They want it to be an achievement. I don't know if you have one-day classes here in Missouri. One-day classes, you can only go to the well so many times on that. And what happens is one-day classes will start out very big, and then over time they get smaller and smaller. The other thing that happens with one-day classes, and I went through one, is that the men that go through them go back to their lodges and they say, I was robbed of something from that. I understand that the lodge was sort of in trouble and we needed to go to that, but I was robbed out of a tremendous experience. Let's not do that anymore. And part of the reason the numbers go down is because these young men go back to their lodges and then become officers and say, let's have the best experience we can have right here in our own lodge. We need to encourage that, brethren. The other thing that's happening is that the baby boomers that we all sort of gave up on, we all said, well, the guys, the children of the World War II generation, they didn't join, and we'll probably never get them. Well, brethren, they're hitting retirement age now. So this massive demographic that we didn't get when they were in their 20s are now hitting retirement age. They've got time on their hands. Until last October, they had money. And while I can't prove it because I don't have numbers, I will say anecdotally I'm seeing more and more situations in lodges all around the country of men in their 20s bringing their fathers into the lodge. And it's happening enough that I think it may be becoming a trend. Brethren, Freemasonry isn't what we do, it's what we are. Freemasonry isn't just about ritual, because face it, who would voluntarily join a memorization club? And it certainly isn't about the trappings of lodge mechanics and politics, because I have never met one single Mason who joined because he wanted to be a lodge officer. Freemasonry is about connecting one to one, brother to brother. Masons who understand it and the lodge that practice that will be the ones that lead us to tomorrow. In many jurisdictions across North America, we lose more men to non-payment of dues and demits than we do to deaths. Now, brethren, that's our failures, yours and mine. There are lodges that are boring their members to death, and there's no reason and there's no excuse for it. The most important lodge meeting in a Mason's life is the fourth one that he goes to. The first meeting that he goes to after he's raised as a Master Mason. That's the meeting he will measure this entire fraternity by. It's the meeting that he will measure his own lodge by and see whether his lodge lives by the precepts they taught him in his degrees. And make no mistake, he wants to believe that the lodge he joined is the very best one that he could have joined. It's the job of every one of us to make sure that he did join the best lodge he could join. Lodges are closing every day because they don't understand why nobody wants suspicious meat sandwiches and generic pop and furniture that stinks and 2-hour meetings that consist of reading the minutes and telling nothing happened last month either. Followed by a bunch of guys stabbing each other in the back in the parking lot. Professional young men today have too many responsibilities and too little free time to feel like you're wasting their Thursday nights. If CSI reruns are more interesting than Lodge, that's our fault. We need to back off worrying so much about putting new butts on seats and start worrying about how we keep them there. It's when lodges stop serving the needs of their members that they fail, because nobody has to come back to next month's meeting. There's no age limit to good leadership. Your lodge can have Xbox tournaments and chili cook-offs and bus trips to the casino, or Masonic lecturers and challenges to write papers within the lodge. If all of your members are over 75, I don't care. Have wheelchair races in the hallway. Your only limits are the ones you place upon yourself and your lodge. The only difference between being in a rut and a grave is the depth. So the Dan Brown effect is now charging right at us. What should we be doing about it? You know, I'm saying different things than I would have said 6 days ago. So we should have been ready before the book came out, but your lodge needs to be ready for this. Read this book. Take the time to read this book and find out, get armed with the knowledge of what's in it. Know what to say when somebody asks you who and what the Freemasons are. Practice your elevator speech. Memorize it. Get it down pat. If you've got 3 sentences to tell somebody what Freemasonry is, and know that speech and be able to tell somebody. Because remember, you are somebody's image of Freemasonry. And for heaven's sakes, don't tell them what a Shriner is when they ask what a Mason is. The next time you walk into your lodge, do it with the eyes and the ears that you had on the first day that you decided to become a Mason. Begin now. Paint, clean, redecorate your lodge. If it's a tumble-down disgrace, nobody's going to knock on your door. The most abused sentence in Freemasonry is, it is the internal, not the external qualifications that Freemasonry regards. Too many lodges use that as an excuse for their place to look like hell, brethren. Make sure your lodge has a website, and that it's up to date. Announcing your 1998 bean supper will have exactly the opposite effect of what you're probably hoping for. Make sure there's signage on your lodge building, directing people either to your website or to a phone contact, along with stating the nights and times of your regular meetings. How can a man ask to join if he doesn't know who to ask? Try to make sure you've got somebody in your lodge who can communicate well, designated as your lodge spokesman, in case the press comes calling. Because, brethren, in towns all across the country, TV stations and newspapers are calling up local lodges and asking them what they think of Dan Brown's book and why should a man join Freemasonry? Reporters are calling your lodges now. I told you guys yesterday, I did 28 radio interviews the day after this book came out. And about the third question that's asked is, why should a man join Freemasonry? And they're going to be calling your local lodges wanting to know this kind of stuff. So make sure you've got somebody that can speak fairly well, that they can think on their feet and communicate accurate information. If your lodge doesn't have somebody to fit the bill, tell them that the press really needs to contact the Grand Lodge, because believe me, your Grand Lodge will have someone. Please avoid cute answers to them like, "We have no secrets except a few funny handshakes." Brethren, we most certainly do have secrets that can only be discovered by each individual Mason as they progress through the degrees. We do have secrets. Yes, some involve methods of recognition that allow one brother to recognize in the dark as well as in the light. But it's okay to keep Freemasonry mysterious to the outside world. It's not a bad thing to tell a reporter or a potential candidate, "I'm sorry, I just can't really tell you." Men of all ages will be seeking truthful information, and in many cases they're going to know more about the fraternity than many of our own members. Direct them to factual books, and most important, tell them the truth within the bounds of your obligation. Please try to avoid canned sloganeering like, "We make good men better ones," or "To be one, ask one," or rattling off statistics. Did you know Freemasons give $3 million a day to charity? We don't, okay? Those figures come from things like the Shrine Foundation that generates that kind of income. So don't perpetuate this information that we've all sort of learned these canned speeches, and the time has come for us to find out what made Freemasonry important to you, and why it works in your lodge, and why a man really needs to join, instead of hunting these simple, pat answers. We're not a community service group. We encourage our brethren to be better servants to the communities. We're not a business network. We're a band of brothers. Every single lodge is going to have an increase in petitioners as a result of the lost symbol. I promise you, you will. Be aware of the ramifications of this increase. Investigate each and every petitioner thoroughly. That doesn't mean asking, does he have a pulse and did his check cash? It does mean asking serious questions as to why he wants to join, because, believe me, we're going to get the fruitcake factor too. We're going to get guys that think that Freemasonry is this mystical thing that it really is not. So be sure you know why he's joining, what he expects, and answer his questions. Don't let him be misled as to what Freemasonry is. There's no rule that says every man who knocks on the door of your lodge should become a Mason, or a Mason at your lodge. If he's not suitable for the fraternity, turn him away. If he's just not a good fit for your lodge, make it your job to find him a lodge that he will be a good fit in. Giving a man a bad experience before he joins or after he's a member creates a man who will badmouth this fraternity for the rest of his life. And if you haven't had much degree work lately, you're going to have more than you know what to do with. Start making sure now that your lodge is capable of putting on the very best ritual work possible. If you don't like the ideas of sending men to one-day classes, guess what? Nobody does. There's only one way to end the one-day classes, and that's to find a way to put on the degrees properly in your lodge. If you can't, band together with lodges in your area and create a degree team that helps each other. Help each other, brethren. Visit back and forth and form strong bonds with other lodges. We're not just operating in a vacuum. Help each other. It's part of that brotherhood thing we're supposed to be practicing. And my wife says I talk in my sleep, and as we all know, a guest speaker is somebody who talks in everybody else's sleep, so I'll finish this up. But it is truly an exciting time to be a Freemason, brethren. We've been given a new chance that Grand Masters have laid awake for decades dreaming of. And we've got so much to offer. Something legendary, something mythical, something extraordinary. The Freemasonry that inspired millions of men the world over. The Freemasonry that inspired you to join. That same Freemasonry is about to be introduced to a massive new wave of men. With this one book, Dan Brown has done more than any membership committee or Grand Lodge PR department ever could. The lost symbol has the potential to affect this fraternity more than any development in the last 60 years. That's not hyperbole, brethren. These kind of numbers are phenomenal. Yeah, Dan Brown has made us seem more mystical and maybe, in a way, a little more interesting than your lodge may really be. But if you didn't have the motivation before, here is your chance to make your lodge the very best it can be. Don't let Freemasonry be ordinary. And don't ever make the mistake of thinking that you as an individual Mason can't influence Freemasonry, that the work of just one Mason can't make a difference. even a dummy, because I'm here to tell you one Mason can make a difference in this fraternity. I'll leave you with a thought that I leave everybody that I talk to with. In 1891, the Freemasons of Chicago built a new headquarters. The Chicago Masonic Temple in 1891 was 22 stories tall. The Freemasons of 1891 in Chicago had built the tallest skyscraper in the world. Daniel Burnham was their architect, and when he designed the Chicago Columbian Exposition 2 years later, Daniel Burnham said something very profound. He said, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans. Aim high in hope and work, remembering that a noble logical diagram once recorded will never die, but long after we're gone will be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency. Remember, our sons and our grandsons are going to do things that will stagger us. Let your watchword be order and your beacon beauty. Think big." Brethren, when we have vision, when we believe this fraternity truly can build temples in the hearts of men, when we believe in the power to change society and the world around us by making better men, one Mason at a time, Freemasons can and do and will accomplish great things. Freemasons have been making and shaping history for 300 years. I think we're poised to make history all over again. Thank you, brethren.